So what's at stake? So I like this graph a lot because to me it's a really simple way of explaining what's happened. In the last 100 years, we have lost 95% of the diversity of our agriculturally important crops. These are the food crops that we eat, and we've lost 95% of the diversity. It's gone. Before we do that, I just want to say, why is that important? Why do we want diversity? What do people know from your own lives that makes you understand why diversity is important? Go ahead.
Resistant to disease.
Yeah. Anything else?
Being able to grow the same seed over and over year round. If you don't have those types of seeds, then you're not going to be able to grow the same type of fruit.
Yep, that's true. That's true. And diversity is important because different things do well in different areas and different climates. Sickle cell anemia is we consider it as a genetic aberration that actually was selected for by the people who lived in tropical climates because it gave them an advantage with tropical diseases, because it made it difficult for the blood cells to pass. I forget now, I'm running out of the data that I remember from high school, but it provided an advantage, so it was selected for by people who lived in tropical Africa. So it's not so helpful if you live in northern Montana, but it's important to be able to have diverse genetic traits to be able to manage different circumstances. And if we lose that, we lose our capacity to be resilient to disruptive change, whether it be a new pest, whether it be a climate matter, whatever it could be. So, and why is that important? So what's important is that, as far as I know, we still eat from food. That's how we survive and thrive. And all food essentially comes from seed. And the diversity in a plant is provided through its seed. It's how we mix up our genetics. That's how every genetically reproducing organism manages genetics. And humans actually are responsible for pretty much all the genetic diversity that we have developed in our agricultural system over the last 16,000 years. All of these crops and varieties that we have had access to and benefited from, we've developed as humans. Because we selected, saved, and shared the seeds of plants that we thought were valuable. So I like to show this one. This is what wild carrots look like. That's what we started with. Pretty different from the carrots that we eat now, right? That's what wild corn looked like originally. And wild wheat. They're very, very different, aren't they, from the crops that we eat today. We did that. Humans did that. 16,000 years of selecting, saving, and sharing the seeds from the plants that we liked. And we got the diversity that we have today. So the good news is that even though we have lost a lot of genetic diversity from our agriculturally significant crops, we can bring it back. It's just a question of starting to save the seeds again and share them. It's really, really that simple. And sharing is, I think, the most important piece of the three equally important pieces of selecting, saving, and sharing seed. Again, sharing seed allows you to share the genetics with somebody else who's growing in a slightly different climate, maybe in a slightly different area, and so the plant will maybe demonstrate some traits you might not have seen, and someone will save those seeds and share them with somebody else. And it helps build the robustness of the genetics of the plants that are important to us. I like to tell the story of that Will Bonsall, who is a gentleman in Vermont, shared with me once. There is a hollow in Vermont where they grew corn, and this was back in the day when everybody had their own farms and they all grew corn that they ate themselves and they fed their animals. So it was a really good corn. It was called White Lightning, and it did well in their hollow, which was susceptible to early frost. And because corn, as we'll talk about a little bit later, cross-pollinates really easily, it's really important that everybody grows the same crop, the same kind of plant, so you're not getting cross-pollination and you're keeping the integrity of the variety. But you don't want to inbreed it. You want to be able to mix the genetics up a little bit. This is So at Christmas time, everybody would have already harvested their corn that summer, and at Christmas time, everybody would bring a bag of corn and an empty mason jar. And when they would go visit at Christmas time, you would go into your neighbor's barn, and you'd take a scoop out of corn from in your mason jar, and you'd drop in your bucket, your bag of corn. So you'd be sharing. It's all White Lightning corn, but some of it's grown in my yard and some of it's grown in yours, and we're mixing up the genetics a little bit. So we're helping to maintain the robustness of the variety. That's what's so important about sharing seed. So how did we get here to this place of low diversity? Seed companies, for lots of reasons, have started to develop started in the late 20s and 30s, but really took off after World War II. In the 50s, we started to develop hybrid seed. And hybrid seed, it's just like when you're, I like to analogize it to dog breeding. People seem to understand that really easily. So dog breeds are breeds that, they're all purebred. And if you want to make a new dog breed, you have to start with purebreds of the two parents. That first generation, so let's say you're going to do a sheeperdoodle, right? That's a sheepdog and a poodle. You start with purebreds of the sheepdog and the poodle. And that first generation, you're going to get a gamish of puppies, right? Some of them are going to look really cute, and some of them are going to look kind of awkward and whatever. And let's say I want to develop my cute sheeperdoodle thing. But the genetics, of course, of that puppy are going to be some sheeperdoodle and some sheep and sheepdog and some poodle. I'm going to have to keep breeding those puppies with puppies from other parents of purebred poodle and sheepdog in order to eventually get reproducible sheeperdoodles. I forget what they're called. That everybody wants to get, right? They're all the pretty size, and they're all the cute curly hair, and they all do whatever they're the right size and all that. And that takes time to develop, right? There's a breeder spends a lot of time getting that new breed developed. If I were to just, as I said, take a puppy from that first generation and breed it with a puppy from another first generation, I'd still get a kind of, maybe I get some big sheepdog looking dogs and some more poodle looking dogs. I wouldn't get the variety I'm looking for. It's the same thing with hybrids. Hybrid seed is made very similarly, purebred parents that have traits we like, and then you hybridize them. That first generation will make a product that you like, but the genetics of the seed that plant produces is all mixed up. So you can't reproducibly plant that seed and expect the second generation to give you the plant you're looking for. So hybrid seed is not really very good for saving seed. It's convenient, so most people just end up buying the hybrid seed every year. We also have plant patenting more and more. It has now become possible to get what are called utility patents on plants, which means that the owner of that patent has the right to exclude you from saving seed of that plant. So that can put a big kibosh on the ability to save the seed. It's a contractual obligation that prevents you from saving that seed for as long as that patent is valid, which is about 20 years. We also have genetically modified organisms, and for a variety of reasons, those are also not available for saving seed. Sometimes the plants are sterile, otherwise oftentimes it's a contractual obligation that keeps you from being able to save that seed. I'll talk about GMOs a little bit later. And then the last question that I really think it's important we just take a couple minutes to talk about. I am going to talk to you about saving seed, but this is important that we all have the same information, is the consolidation of seed companies. So this is a picture that's a little offside, I don't know why. This is our global seed industry. This is our commodity seed structure, proprietary seed industry. This was what it looked like up until 2017. You'll notice that there are some bigger circles. Those bigger circles, the circle's size is corresponding to their market share, their position in the market. And the color tells you what type of a company it is. So red is chemical, blue is seed, and green is other. And oftentimes that other is a biotech company or some kind of tech company. So the largest companies in this picture are chemical companies that are controlling the seed supply. So this map represents over 60% of our global seed supply and over 80% of our commodity seed supply globally. And the red circles, you know, that are collecting these are list mergers that took place in 2017 and the dollar values associated with them. And this is what it looks like now. So in the previous one, you'll notice a company that many people have heard a lot about, Monsanto, over to the left. And in the new one, Monsanto's kind of disappeared because it's been purchased by Bayer, and Bayer is now the face of the chemical component of that global company. Down off the right, DuPont and Dow have now become Corteva. But the biggest piece I just want to say is we now have 4 major global companies that are managing the seed supply of the majority of commodity crops that we rely on, either for food or for fiber or for animal feed. So last piece, I often get this question, what about Norway and this Svalbard seed vault? This is a fabulous thing if you don't know anything about it. There is a seed vault that is 1.5 miles underground on an island in Norway that is sometimes called, it's the Doomsday Vault. This gentleman, Kerry Fowler, drove it, and over the course of 10 years, they've collected open pollinated seed from countries around the world to save that seed and keep it secure under, you know, pretty much every scenario one could think of, whether it's a meteorite or an alien invasion. But the tricky thing is that it's in Norway. That is just not going to help you and me in Montana. If there is a doomsday thing that happens, no one is going to be running to Norway and saying, wait, we got to take care of the people in the Flathead Valley, make sure they get seed. Not going to happen. So we are responsible for our own seed supply. We need to be saving our own seeds here locally. So we have seed libraries here, we have Free the Seeds. This is why we're doing all this work. You saving your own seeds, sharing it with your neighbors, sharing it with your community. It's the most resilient thing we can do for our food system. And that's what makes a resilient community. And because we have to have food if we're going to be a community, and if we want to live as a community through tough times, the best thing we can do is have our own seeds and know how to grow them. So that's what this is all about. And that's why Free the Seeds exists. So let's get down to what's going on about seed saving. Here's why you came. So when you're going to start saving seeds, there's 3 questions you always want to ask yourself. And when you get out of this room, you're going to be able to answer these questions really easily. And it's not more complicated than this. You want to know whether the seeds that you're going to plant, are they true to type seeds? That's the first question. Are the seeds I'm going to plant going to grow true to type? That's question number 1. And I'll go through these in detail. Second question is, does the plant that grows from this seed self-pollinate? That means it's called a sulfur. Or does it cross-pollinate, which is what we just call a crosser? Is it a sulfur or a crosser? And the third question is, knowing what kind of seed I have, sulfur or crosser, what do I need to consider when I'm planting my garden? So first thing, will my seed grow true to type? So this is open pollinated seeds are seeds where the genetics are settled. Again, I plant that seed and I know that the next generation product is going to produce a seed that pretty much looks like the parent. That's called open pollinated, as compared with hybrids, which we talked about a little bit earlier. Yeah, I'm just not going to go there. So, but hybrids and GMOs you'd like to stay away from. So now let's just take a second here, because this is a little question that some people get confused about. So how do you know whether your seed is a hybrid or not? If you buy your seed in a seed packet, it will say if it's a hybrid. It'll say it either on the packet as the word hybrid, you'll notice the circle on the left, or it'll say F1, which is the packet on the right. The F1 you typically see on European packets, but sometimes you see it in the US. F1 it's another word for hybrid. What I want to point out too, you'll notice the middle packet. The middle packet, the circle says hybrid, the packet says organic. And sometimes people get confused between the two. So the hybrid has to do with, it defines the genetics of the seed. Organic has to do with how that plant was grown, how the plant was grown that produced the seed. USDA certified organic means organic food or products that were produced without conventional pesticides, without fertilizers that were made with synthetic ingredients or sewage sludge, no bioengineering, that means GMO, and no ionizing radiation. So again, organic has to do how the plant was grown. Hybrid or open pollinated has to do with the genetics of the seed. So you can have organic hybrid, you can have conventionally grown hybrid, you can have conventional, I can't do the other way around, but anyway, it's very simple, right? Okay, that's a key difference. They're not synonymous in any way. The next thing is GMO. I'm going to take 3 minutes to talk a little bit about GMO because this is important for our health. So GMO crops are primarily commodity crops: soy, canola, cotton, sugar beets, rice, cereals. And GMO seeds are not currently available at the home gardener retail packet level. So why are we going to spend any time talking about it? Because it's really not something you guys are going to encounter when you're buying packeted seeds. So, you know, one reason might be that you might want to save the seed from a tomato or some other plant that you might buy that might have been made through genetically modified foods, materials. So squashes, sweet corn, sweet peppers, tomatoes, and melons can be genetically modified. That might be in your food. I wouldn't save those seeds if you didn't know where you, if you don't know where your food is coming from, don't save seeds from it. But that's really not that important. More importantly is the herbicide the reason that GMOs exist. So GMOs are this is a generalization, but it's enough of a generalization that it's worth sharing. They are primarily developed in order to allow for an herbicide to be sprayed on a crop without damaging the crop. So most commonly is the herbicide is Roundup or Glyphosate, if you've heard that word. And the Monsanto developed what were called Roundup Ready seeds. It started with soybeans. And it was that it allowed them to, they had a genetic modification. Basically, it was a different bacterial gene that was inserted that protected the plant from the herbicide. That's basically what it's doing. It's protecting the plant from the herbicide. So now you could spray the field, you could plant your crop, and your crop would be protected, but all the other weeds and whatever other plants were growing would disappear and not thrive. They wouldn't grow. So that's fine. That's great. The key, and it used to be back in the early days, this really was sort of like a miracle drug because it didn't take very much. It got rid of all the weeds, and your crop, it saved farmer time and money and expense because he didn't have to keep weeding or tilling or doing other stuff to get rid of weeds. But of course, what happens when you do that is you develop herbicide-resistant weeds. And so now you have to be adding more and more of your herbicide. And the tricky thing about glyphosate is that it actually doesn't kill the weeds. What it does is it basically starves them, and so they ultimately just kind of wither and die. And that becomes important to the rest of the story in a second. So two things that nobody was really paying attention to back in the day when they were developing this as an herbicide was that it not only kills all these other plants, but it also kills the microbes in the soil. That was not so important because industrial agriculture really wasn't paying attention to the microbes in the soil. They were just applying fertilizer, and nobody was thinking about microbes. Turns out that the microbes in the soil really are essential for developing the health of that plant, but also those microbes in the soil are very, 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 very similar to the microbes in our gut. So time goes on, we're putting more and more herbicide down because we've got herbicide-resistant weeds. Now we're spraying all during the life of our crops, and then we have this really cool idea. And the cool idea is that if we're growing a crop for seed, which happens to be all of our cereal crops and a lot of our legumes, like soy, you need to wait till those crops, the seed ripens before you harvest it. So rye, wheat, whatever you're doing, you're not even, so you have to harvest the seed crops when they're ripe, your cereal crops when the seed is ripe. And you're dependent on weather. And it was discovered that because the way glyphosate works is, remember I told you it starves the plant? So now you could spray glyphosate on any cereal, it doesn't matter whether it's Roundup Ready or not. In fact, it's better if it's not. And you can sort of trigger that sort of death of the plant at the end of its life, and so that all of your crops will ripen at the same time, and it makes it easier for you to harvest that crop. So it's quite attractive to apply these desiccating herbicides at the end of a seed crop's life in order to promote maturation in a timely way. But now that herbicide is on the seed crop, and it gets turned into flour, and it gets put into products that we eat. And there's a whole host of crops that are allowed to be sprayed. They've been grandfathered in. And here are some products, and here's some of the foods where we found glyphosate. And the tricky part about this, even though we're told that it's small amounts, is that we're eating it, and we're providing it into contact with the soil, with the gut microbes that digest our food. So we got a little problem going on here, and this is why I take the time to share about the importance of, remember I told you about organic? Organic means it's unsprayed. So important that if you're going to buy processed food, that you buy organically grown food. It's the only way to know that you do not have sprayed seed crops producing the food that you're eating. It's the best thing you can do for your health, your gut health. I can't emphasize that enough. So it's kind of scary where things are today. General Mills is trying to backtrack from that. They're working really hard. Lots of other companies are going to be doing that down the road. In the meantime, please eat organic. This is why it's important to understand what organic means, and don't use herbicides, and let's start saving our own seeds. So back to seed saving. Okay, so remember I told you I need to figure out what type of seed I have. The second question is it a sulfur or a crosser? Okay, so what's important to know there? This is a picture of a flower. I wish I had a thing. Oh, I do. So what I want to point out is just a couple little simple things. So flowers, sex is just like human sex. It's pretty much the same. Maybe looks a little different, but that thing that looks like a helicopter landing pad at the top, it's a stigma, and it is a sticky flat surface to which pollen, which is the male part of the plant, that in this case comes from these anthers, those yellow long things. So the anthers produce pollen. The pollen, which is basically the male component of the plant, lands on the stigma, which is part of the female part of the plant's reproductive system, and then it'll travel down what's called the style to here that's called the ovule, where there's an ovary, and each one of these little ovules will develop into a seed. So in this particular plant, you'll notice that the petals of the flower they kind of surround the stamen and the pistils. The stigma and the pistils. And so it's like this little bubble in which the pollen and the stigma connect. And that's called a perfect flower. And in this case, because the petals of the leaves serve to kind of protect everything, and pretty much all the pollen is going to go into, it's going to self-pollinate. This is what we call a flower of a sulfur plant. Okay, before we go to the next one, these are some examples of vegetables that are formed from sulfur flowers. And they're really easy to save seed from, because these are what we call, they don't cross-pollinate, they'll pollinate themselves. You don't have to worry so much about cross-pollination issues. And they're beans, peas, tomatoes, lettuces, peppers, a little tricky, but pretty much, and eggplant is another one. But beans, peas, lettuce, tomatoes especially. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. I included the Latin name in here for a reason. You'll see why in a second. It's really useful to you to get in the practice of recognizing the Latin names of your plants, and I'll tell you why in just a second. So sulfurs, they self-pollinate perfect flowers. You want to compare that with imperfect flowers. So an imperfect flower, they're either on separate the male and female are either on completely different plants, or they're on separate parts of the plant. So in a corn plant, the tassel up at the top, right? That's the male part of the plant. And the silk of the corn, the silk is the stigma and the style that the pollen will travel all the way along that silk, and then it will fertilize a little ovule, which will turn into a kernel. That's the word I was looking for, on your ear of corn. So every kernel on your ear of corn was fertilized by a single thread of those that silk that came from pollen from a tassel, possibly from that plant, but could be from another plant, could be from your neighbor across the road. Corn pollen can travel, it's very, very light, can travel half a mile. Actually, it can travel, I think, a mile, a long distance. So that's one. These are squash plants, and you may or may not have noticed this before, but this summer when you grow your squash, pay attention. The female squash blossoms have this little bulb at the bottom, and that's the ovule. The male blossoms don't. They'll exist on the same plant, but just check them out. And a little side note, if you have a squash, you may find a squash plant and all you see are male flowers. And you say, what's going on? That plant is stressed in some way. Typically it's temperature. And for whatever reason, the plant has the knowledge that, like, I am not going to put effort into getting my female flowers going and seeds and all that stuff. It's energetically very expensive. If I'm not ready to be making that into seed, I'm going to hold off. So it's kind of freaky when you only see male flowers, but it just basically means there's something happening and that plant's just pausing. Okay, so crosser vegetables are a little more complicated because you can get cross-pollination, and that's just like, you know, those puppies of that first generation. It's not a big deal, but if you're trying to maintain integrity of a variety, you want to pay attention to cross-pollination. So this is why the Latin name is going to be helpful to you. Here are some examples of crossing vegetables. So corn, like I said, cross-pollinates like the dickens, and the pollen travels quite a long distance. Cucumbers, melons, radish, spinach, squashes, pumpkins, and then acorn squashes and things like that. So basically your squashes and your pumpkins and your brassicas, which I'll talk about in just a second. However, having said that, the Latin name is going to help you because you'll notice the Latin name. There's a genus, which starts with a capital letter, and then there's the species, which is the non-capitalized letter. So check this out. Here we have a whole host of melons. They're all Cucumis mello, okay? These are all going to cross with each other. They're all the same species, different varieties, same species. The only way to maintain seed integrity of this variety, if you want it, is if you don't plant any member of this species within proximity to each other, okay? But let's say I want to save, did I get this right? Well, so let's look at our squashes. Same thing here. All the buttercups, hubbards, and marrows. Cucurbita maxima, don't want to save seeds from if you're going to grow a couple of those, don't save seeds from all of them at the same time. But butternuts are Cucurbita moschata. I don't know if that's how I pronounce it. I'm not sure. Maybe it's moscata. I could grow butternuts and buttercups within proximity, and they will not cross-pollinate. So that's where the Latin name is going to help you. You want to be able to know the species. Just pay attention to that. Now, having said that, that's a general rule. If you've got a lot of squashes in a close proximity, you're going to get some mixing. So, you know, but that's the key piece to pay attention to. Okay, now, brassicas are pretty interesting. So brassicas are, we call them, it's basically your kale, your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, cauliflower, cabbage. They're not only the same species, they're all the same plant. Just somebody saved aberrations from them, and then saved those seeds and developed them. So kale, the specialty part of that plant is the leaves. Broccoli and cauliflower, the specialty part has to do with the cauliflower. It's the flower bud. Brussels sprouts, it's the lateral leaf buds. Broccoli, it's also the flower buds with the stem. Kohlrabi, it's a lower part of the stem. I just think this is just phenomenal. And by the way, check out the flower, right? You know, that's incredibly promiscuous. That stuff is just flowing everywhere, right? They're cross-pollinating left, right, and center. So you don't want to try to save seed from more than one of these at a time in proximity. I just think that's the coolest thing on earth.
How much proximity would you?
Well, I'm going to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
I'm going to get to that in a minute because it's a little bit of a thought process. So then the last thing I just want to introduce you to is the biennials. So then there are a group of plants, and these are often, it's not all, but it's oftentimes our root plants, where they overwinter. It takes them 2 years to produce seed. It's typically going to be your root plants because they're going to spend their first year putting all their energy into that root because they're trying to save energy because they're going to use that energy the second year to produce the seed. Seed is energetically very expensive for a plant. It puts all its time and focus on making that happen, right? Its job is to reproduce itself. Now, we don't often see the flowering or the seed process in our root plants because we eat the root plants, right? But that's why the plant is making those roots, is because it's trying to save energy for the next year. Okay, so the first question that I want to address is, what if I just want to eat the greens? So let's see, what did I say here? No. So let's go back here. You could grow all of these if you're just going to eat them, right? And you can, so it's not about the plant. Like you can grow all of these together if you're going to eat them. It's just if you want to save the seed. That's really key. And so if you want to save the seed, honestly, I think the simplest thing is you save from one variety a year. Like that's just, unless you can have really significant distance, or you can take some precautions, which I'll share about. Knowing what kind of seed I have, sulfur or crosser, what do I need to consider when I'm planting my garden? And what I tell people is start with the easy ones. Start with the sulfurs. Start with the peas, the lettuce, the tomatoes. Peppers, again, I say that with a little bit of a caveat. Peppers, they seem to be a little more promiscuous than tomatoes, particularly if you're going to grow them in a confined space like a greenhouse or a hoop house. So you might want to take precautions if you're going to save seed from your peppers and you care about the integrity of your seed variety. If you've got, if that's really, really important to you. And so what I do actually is I don't grow my peppers or tomatoes indoors. I grow them outside. I only grow varieties that do well in our area. But I'll separate my varieties with some kind of a big flowering plant between them. Because they can cross-pollinate a little bit with insects, and so if I just make it much more attractive for the insects to be, focused on the flowers that's right in front of them, they're not going to do the work to try to get into a pepper plant's flower because it's more complicated, and there's many more things that are easier for them to go after. But beans, peas, and peppers and lettuces are super easy to save. So that's what we would say to save. So if you're going to do the next level of seed saving, which is your crossers, there are some things you can do to try to keep cross-pollination to a minimum. The key considerations you want to pay attention to is the first thing you want to find out is whether your plant is pollinated by the wind or whether it's pollinated by an insect. That's going to make a difference. And you can pay attention to maybe the bloom times and plant them so that they'll bloom at different times so that you don't have to worry about cross-pollination. You can plant in different gardens. You can build isolation cages. This is an isolation cage we built for when we were growing carrot for seed. And you put the pollinators inside. You actually put the larva of the pollinator inside the isolation cage so that they don't touch anything else but the flowers that are inside that cage. You can hand pollinate. This is how most people do things like squash blossoms. They have a nice big flower. And basically what you want to do is you need to pry open the flower when it's just about right. Take an anther of the pollen that you want and then dust it on the stigma of the female plant flower. And then you want to close it back up again. And then you want to put a big stake there with a sign that says, "Saving this for seed nobody pick," because you'll forget. But so you can do things like that. Little trickier, but more fun to play with because it's just a question of figuring it out and making mistakes, and it's all good. All of this information is on my website. I have handouts for them. But more importantly, on this piece is, so when they're ripe, how do you know when it's time to harvest the seed? And so the first thing you want to ask yourself is whether it's a fruit seed or whether it's a roots or greens seed. So am I harvesting it from the fruit or am I harvesting it from another part of the plant? So fruit seeds, what are some examples of plants where we eat the fruit? Grapes. Tomato is a fruit. We eat the tomato. Melons. Cucumbers. Now, how many of these plants and fruits do we eat when they're ripe? Or which ones do we eat when we're not ripe? Do we know? Does anybody know? Cucumber. So we eat cucumber when it's not ripe. That's correct. How about bell peppers? Those are unripe fruit. Green peppers? Green peppers. Yeah, they're unripe. Anything else?
Right here.
I got them right there. Very good.
There's a whole list of them.
There is a whole list of them. So here's the deal. Summer squash, green peppers, eggplants, peas, green beans, sweet corn, cucumbers. Those are all food that we eat that technically the fruit is not ripe yet. So if you want to save any of those for seed, you have to let that plant seed ripen. And it'll ripen when either it's mature, when if it's got a husk around it, that husk is dry and hard. If it's got a shell, and it's usually anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks past what we would call the eating stage. Flint corn. Oh, dang it! I had some corn and I left it downstairs. That's too bad. So yellow corn, right? We like to eat that. That's called the milk stage when we like to eat it. But it's actually dry and shriveled on the cob if you let it stay, and that's when you want to harvest it for seed. So basically, you got to leave that fruit on the plant, unless it's tomatoes. So there are some that we can eat, right? Tomatoes, watermelon, those seeds we eat when the fruit is ripe. But everything else, you want to wait until the husk hardens or the seed dries. So cucumbers. So if you think of a pumpkin, right? We leave our winter squashes out there, and they form a nice hard shell, right? When we take our winter squash in, that's the cucumber. That's how you want your cucumber to be. So you leave that puppy on the vine for weeks and weeks and weeks, and it doesn't look anything like. I can't believe it. Anyways, it doesn't matter. They'll look bright orange they'll be really big. They have a hard husk. It's the last thing you want to eat, but that's when the seed is ripe. So rule of thumb, leave it on the plant as long as you can if it's a fruit that you normally eat when it's unripe. Just trust yourself, don't pick it. Go to YouTube or look online, lots of pictures of what it should look like, pretty easy to do. And then if you have to, you can pull the whole plant. This works really well for lettuces or beans and peas, and hang them upside down to dry. Then you want to clean the seed according to whether it's wet pulp or dry pulp. I'm not going to go into that, but the description of it is on here, and here's a nice little description for tomato seed. Basically, wet pulp simply means that the seed has a little gel sac around it, and you typically want to take that gel sac off. Very simple how to do that. Lots of easy instructions. Dry pulp is considered the pulp that surrounds like squash seeds, that stringy stuff. So you just got to wash that off, and you really want to let your seed dry. So it should be crisp. It should break in half with a nice crisp sound, and then you want to store it in a cool, dark, dry place. And if you do those things, your seed should be viable for a good number of years. Rule of thumb is 3 to 5 years for most everything except members of the onion family or the chives and garlic family. Most everything else, minimum 3 to 5 years is really good. So that's fruit seed. Then the other ones are your greens and roots. And so here's the tricky part about these. The thing about the fruit seed is that plant has already developed its seed, right? You're eating the fruit, so it's already gone to seed. And you know the size and how long that's taken pretty much. Most you have to wait is 3 to 5 weeks for it to turn, to ripen, but it's not going to get any bigger. That's different from plants that are grown where we normally eat the leaves or the stems or the roots, because they have not gone to seed. So you got to let that plant flower. You have to let all those flowers turn into seed, and then you have to let those seeds ripen. And that takes time, and trust me when I tell you, it takes space. So this is a lettuce plant that's bolted and gone to seed, right? We're used to lettuce plants that are about this big, right? And that's probably 3 feet. So you got to be willing to have a plant that gets to be about 3 feet, and maybe it's going to take up about this space. And it gets kind of unwieldy, it's kind of big, and so you have to be willing to stake it. Your neighbors might think you look crazy. Your garden's going to look really different. It's not going to be, a little precise, clean. And that has to be okay with you, because if you want to let it go to seed, you got to let it be a little wild. And then you got to be patient, because it takes a long time. So figure out how long it takes for that plant to go to seed, and start early enough to make that happen. For lettuces, some people start them indoors and transplant them out, because that's the fastest way to get the plant going. When I grow radish seed, I can get radish in 1 year if I plant my radish out by April 1st. As soon as that ground is workable, I plant radish seeds. And then the other thing is, so the radish, you could plant your radishes pretty close together when you're growing to eat the radish, but that plant's going to get really big. It's going to be about this wide, and it's going to be about this tall. So you have to create spacing that allows that to happen. Very important to give yourself that time, give yourself that space, and then you harvest the seeds. Pretty simple, very straightforward. You pull the plant. Maybe a lot of these types of plants, they're in pods, and the pods might tend to shatter as they get ripe. So you'll want to put them in a bag, or maybe you tie a paper bag around it as the plants ripen. I have more information about this on my website. Lots of books and resources. It's just mostly a consideration to think about when you're planning your garden that I'm trying to communicate right now. It's but the harvesting of the seed once it's ripe, again, pretty straightforward. We have not evolved that process very much in 10,000 years. Okay, that's it. So cool, dark, dry are the rules of thumb for seed saving. The most important thing probably is labeling. because all those brassica seeds look pretty much the same. And if you do not label, from the moment you put your hand on that plant, trust me, you'll be saying, well, we'll see what that is come next year. It is way too easy to lose track. So label, 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 and then label. Okay, lots of resources. I have lots on my website, all over YouTube. These are a couple. There's even more that I should have on here that I don't. If you want more skill building resources, Flathead Grows, which is a community seed library, offers free workshops. There's information down in the booth about them. We have free workshops on how to grow everything from soil to seed over the course of a season, starting in 2 weeks. We also have seed packing parties, and you can pick up free seeds there. It's at the Columbia Falls Library. Free the Seeds, of course, here is another skill building resource. Arrow is a statewide organization that's dedicated to helping communities build these values-based food systems. So I invite you to support them. It's a member-driven organization dedicated to really helping communities become food resilient. $5 a month keeps Arrow working for you. I'm a member of Arrow. I'm a member of the board. I'm currently an interim co-executive director, so I'm just taking this time to plug it. And then locally, we have Glacier Feast. We have an organization of farmers, food advocates, and food businesses that have come together to help build our resilient food system. And they have a booth downstairs. You can sign up to get information from them. They are dedicated to finding ways to help close all the gaps in our food system so that we are resilient as a community. And we have a workshop and public event with Dan Kittredge coming March 28th and 29th it's all about understanding the intimate relationship between soil health and human health. Highly invite you to attend that. And that's it. Be curious, take it lightly, and welcome the mistakes. They're all part of the process. I have about 10 minutes if anybody has any questions. Yes?
So, I guess I kind of understand why saving genetically GMO plant seeds, maybe not a great idea. I guess when it comes to the hybrids, is it just because you're concerned about that integrity and getting the exact same plant? Or?
It's mostly, so yes, okay. At a genetic level, yes. Okay. Sometimes the seed is sterile, sometimes, so I don't know if, do you know your Mendelian? So it's that. It's that, I could show you that picture. Second, there is another piece which I just didn't get into, because it's a topic. But honestly, a lot of that seed might have a contract on it that prevents you from saving that seed. It could. It's unclear. But honestly, the genetics are, particularly because those lines are so inbred. Those lines are so inbred at it's just quite likely you'll just get a whole range of stuff, and then you won't know. You just won't, you can do it. You won't know. And you can do it. It'll take about 8 generations to stabilize those genetics. Definitely possible to do it. It could be a fun project. But it's just not easy by any stretch.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Where is that event at?
The
28th and 29th.
So we have a workshop and a public event. The workshop will be at the Center for Sustainability in Whitefish. If you sign up at their booth downstairs, we'll make sure to get you this information. He just committed last night, so we're working on the public event location. I'm hoping we can get this venue, but I don't actually know yet. So please sign up, or if you don't remember anything else, send an email to Free the Seeds or send an email to me at the Good Seed Company, and we'll make sure you get that information. Yeah.
What kind of tomato varieties have you planted outdoors here and been successful with?
So the Good Seed Company sells a whole variety of plants of tomatoes that do well here, and they all actually come from Russia. They were developed by people in Russia, I don't know, anywhere from 50 to 150 years ago, and have made it over here because they do really well with cool nights. It's high latitude, high altitude. Yep. So, and now I have to start my seeds indoors. I start my tomatoes indoors now, and I take really good care to make sure that I'm building a good, strong root system. I don't try to get really big plants, but I get thick stems. That's really what I'm going for. So I keep the lights on. I'm low. I'm like, so the plant doesn't have to do any work. I feed it a lot, so it's nice and thick stemmed, and it's a really big root ball. And when I plant it outside, then it goes to town, and it'll get as big as, you know, people who grew them, in, you know, who really know what they're doing. And if they're strong, when you plant them, they will survive an early season frost, you know, in September or something like that.
Because
Yeah.
we're about 500 to 800 feet above this elevation. So the concern is that it's just not going to be warm enough at night for them to ripen.
Yep.
Is that a?
Well, so I don't know what the temperature is. You do want to pay attention to that. Clearly, they're a tropical plant. If you're concerned about, so the other thing that I do, because I don't grow them in a hoop house or a greenhouse, is I grow them in containers, and I find that that's helpful. I think that the fact that they're contained, I can put a bunch of containers together, and then I can, if I need to, I throw a sheet over them or something like that. But that seems to help a lot.
So
Is
maybe kind of like a raised
Mhm.
bed.
Yeah,
with
sure.
just the tomatoes,
Mhm.
and just make sure they have a little bit of cover if they need it.
Mm-hmm. And you want things short season, and also take a really. I think it's important to take good care to give them a really good, strong beginning. And I don't know if you attended Matt Thrasher's class on growing tomatoes.
No.
We'll have a video on it in about a month.
Okay.
And he's at Box of Rain, and you can call him or you can go see him. He's a great resource on how to support getting good tomato production. Yeah.
So when it comes to, you know, say you've got the seeds and you process them, when you say cool, dark, is refrigerator best, or is simply a dark cabinet in your kitchen okay?
So cool means dry is key, and if I missed that, I apologize. So cool, dark, and dry. And the reason I say dry is important is because refrigerators tend to be humid, the little humidifiers, and so kitchen, a cupboard could be fine as long as it's not near your oven or your stove, you know. Or a pantry or someplace that's, you know, dry is really important.
But not a refrigerator.
Well, so then what I do, freezer is okay. I store in glass jars if I'm going to store them in, so if I'm going to store short stints, I will store in my refrigerator for short stints in a glass jar, but then I put like a paper bag of rice in there, and that'll absorb any moisture. And some people will also freeze their seed. That's also a thing you can do. I always put some kind of an absorbent in there, which is typically rice, in a paper bag of some kind. Do you have any tips about storing, Leslie, by any chance? I mean, no. Sorry, never mind. Okay, anything else? Because we're just about out of time. Feedback or? Nope. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. Yes?